Why are there so many podcasts about Tottenham? Do I want to know why? They might contain insight, but mostly delusions. If I hear one more, I might die. They don't like Levy and they don't like Enoch. They pine for Moo and Conte. Someday we'll like 'em, old Tottenham Hotspur, the podcast clout chasers and me.
Why did I write myself a difficult intro? Okay, here we go. Guten Abend, Guten Morgen, or Guten Tag, depending on where you are in the world. Unless you're a Frankfurt fan, in which case, Auf Wiedersehen, I guess. My name is Ian, and I'm here to talk to you today about a group of tired young men turning up every week, doing the same thing over and over, and hoping results will change. I'm of course talking about Tottenham Hotspur podcasters, because you're listening to Tottenham Hotspur, the Spurs pod, about Spurs pods. You have no idea how happy I am that I managed to get that out. It took me like 10 tries. Spurs won a game. They won an important game for the first time in my time recording this show. The last one was against Southampton, and no one really seemed to think that counted. But yesterday in the Europa League, Spurs went to Eintracht Frankfurt and won 1-0 thanks to a penalty from Dom Solanke. James Maddison basically had to die for us to get it, but we did get it and we won. I wasn't planning on recording today, if I'm honest, because quite frankly, the response to the Change for Tottenham pod has been pretty good. Great feedback on Blue Sky as always, good listens across all platforms. I was pretty happy, and I was just kind of chilling my beans until next Tuesday when I've got a special guest to come on the show and talk about the Spurs show. But then I succumbed to peer pressure because, again, those same people on Blue Sky, thank you, Fergus, were pressuring me to talk about how the podcasters were responding to a monumental win, something which really signaled to some the end of the Ange Postecoglou era. And in fact, we now kind of live in this weird parallel universe for some. That Ange is still with us. We won a big game. He seemed to make all the right calls. So people want to know how Spurs podcasters who've been calling for his head for weeks have responded. So yeah, basically peer pressure. Before I get into it, if you like what you hear today, please like and subscribe and share and all those good things. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Tottenham Hotspur, or you can email me at tottenhampodspur@gmail.com. So here we are. Spurs are into the semi-finals of the Europa League. It's finally a bright day in Spurs podosphere world for the first time in what feels like forever. There's been lots of gallows humor and joking over the past few months, but I wouldn't say anybody's been really happy except since maybe, I don't know, the Liverpool first leg in the Carling Cup or the League Cup. Showed my age there by saying the Carling Cup. So yeah, good times. We're going to play Bodo Glimt soon. I did try to look into some Bodo Glimt pods for this show, but to see their response to facing Tottenham, and all of it is in Norwegian, and I don't quite yet speak Norwegian, so we'll have to figure that one out. So, as I mentioned, how did Spurs podcasters respond to Spurs winning a big game when all of the signs seem to suggest that Ange Postecoglou was nearing the exit, at least if you were to listen to journalists and certain influencers? I wasn't quite sure how I was going to structure this podcast, and so, again, Fergus and a few others on Blue Sky gave me some things to look out for, essentially a bingo card. So let's just, just run through that first. We've got only one because of a penalty as an excuse given by some of the podcasters. Nobody said that. Spurs didn't do anything in the second half. Again, nobody really said that. It was due to luck. No, I don't think that came up. You can't play like that and expect to win the cup. 0. Nobody said that. Actually, the opposite was expressed by the folks at the cheese room, that actually, if they keep playing like this, we might win the Europa League. But there were a couple of points that were raised pre-recording, that Frankfurt were unlucky and didn't show up. 1 or 2 pods did say that. And there were some people, not necessarily podcasters, but there was some questioning whether or not this was still Ange ball. And in fact, a listener on the Fighting Cock asked this, and they pushed back, which I thought was quite impressive. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of what people expected of Spurs podcasters going into into my listening session. I think I ground through like 10 podcasts today. Don't tell my boss. So let's get on with it. So I'm looking at these reviews with an eye on how they're talking about Ange Postecoglou. And if I'm honest, I was slightly uncomfortable doing this today. I felt like I was filtering their points through my narrative for the first time since I started recording this podcast. And I don't think that's a great way to approach this type of review. I prefer to kind of listen to stuff and let an idea percolate up. But it does seem to be the most like specific and important question at this point is how are people talking about Ange Postecoglou? So overall, I would say that the podcasters that I listen to, all of these were at my desk today with various levels of headphones on, whilst I was grinding out work to close out the work week. And so I tuned into OhSoSpurs, WeAreTottenhamTV, SpurredOn, The Cheese Room, Tottenham Depot, Wicked Spursy for a minute, An Echo of Glory for a minute, The Fighting Cock, Rule the Roost, The Game is About Glory. I managed to squeeze that one in while I was tidying up the kitchen after dinner tonight. And I think that's about it. Oh, and The View for the Lane. One last one. Squeeze one more in there. And so generally speaking, I would say that across the podcast, there was fairly muted enthusiasm. That wasn't to say that they were despondent or down, just that there was more of a sense of relief rather than joy at being in the semi-final. I think it's because it was a game that we didn't exactly dominate in terms of attacking possession. You know, we won through a penalty, we did get some good chances, but we spent a lot of the game, especially the back half of the game, just kind of doggedly defending. So I think that type of game, combined with the narrative going into it of Spurs being this dysfunctional mess, kind of led to fan podcasters especially, being quite reserved in their happiness. And don't get it twisted, they are happy. We had some silliness, don't get me wrong, you know, people talking about going to Bilbao, you know, with a wink and a nudge. But there were no real head wobbles. There was no kind of screaming from the rooftops from what I heard in my little corner of the Spurs universe. And so yeah, you know, it was mostly relief, some planning for Norway. I think there's some excitement and some trepidation to go to the Arctic Circle. There was talk of shepherding boats, and also people are starting to look towards Bilbao. You know, there was respect given to the Norwegians, but there's an expectation that if Spurs show up, we should have enough over 2 legs to beat this team. So we should be looking towards the final. And I think this is a good place for us to be in as a fan base. Perhaps it's arrogant, but I think it's just saying that we want to show this team that's this Bodo Glimt, that is, we want to show them the respect that they deserve through them beating Lazio and other big teams throughout this competition. We want to turn up, do a professional job, and book our tickets to Bilbao. So it's interesting though, it wasn't until I listened to OhSoSpurs, which was about the 5th or 6th podcast I listened to today, that I remember hearing somebody spend any time talking about the Nottingham Forest game. And again, I think this is kind of indicative of where the fan base is at the moment. It's we're accepting to a certain extent that the Premier League is gone. And if we put all of our eggs into the Europa basket, maybe it can save us, save our season. I don't think that's universal, but that seems to be the undercurrent and reading between the lines of people just not even talking about a big game against the next manager on Monday. Overall, the pods emphasise Tottenham's defensive performance and the qualities of players like Mickey van der Ven, Cuti Romero, just some really good defending. Tactical astuteness from Bentancur, some good discipline, and a great performance from Solanke up front, just, bodying guys when he needed to, and doing good hold-up play. And again, just kind of looking forward to Bodo. I think there's some excitement to play a team that I don't believe we've played before, in an interesting place. And it should be exciting. It looks like a really cool stadium. So yeah, hopefully we get the job done at the Lane on May 1st, and we can go and have some fun on a really interesting away day for anybody who's going to be going. So, focusing in on Ange, something difficult that I found when listening to these podcasts with the manager in mind is that football discourse after wins is inherently biased towards the importance and performance of players. Again, especially like Solanke, Romero, like these were guys who did really important things in the game. And so when the manager is almost like an afterthought, like it's, unless they're one of these guys who have the cult of personality around them, like Pep Guardiola. And I realize saying that out loud that I have a discussion point about cultists later. But I mean like the superstar, megastar, celebrity managers, where their every decision is, and everything that happens is attributed to them rather than their players. In this case, I would say that the system works so well, and the changes from our usual patterns of play were suggestive of a decision by Ange. But the majority of these podcasts were spending their time talking about, how good the players were, as they should. These players went out and they did us proud for the first time in weeks. Danny Kelly on The View from Lane was so defensive of them that he said he wouldn't allow any negative player comments, which he immediately backtracked on within the pod when he shit-talked Heung-Min Son, saying that he was kind of happy that Sonny was injured and stayed at home and wasn't a temptation for Ange to bring him off the bench. But yeah, generally speaking, the role of Ange playing a system that he hasn't really employed too much was generally underplayed, I would say, by the podcasters. And there were a few who said they expected more of Frankfurt. But I think that comes from people who are much more familiar with Frankfurt's style of play, like somebody like Carolyn on the Tottenham Depot. And I can totally understand that. But I would say that myself and others have viewed it more as a case of Tottenham being disciplined and not allowing Frankfurt to play to their fullest, as opposed to, as I had suggested, Frankfurt giving us too much respect. So yeah, I had little time to listen to absolutely everything that I could. I mean, I know I said about 10 podcasts, but, when you listen at 1.5, 2 times speed to try to grind through stuff, you miss some nuance, I think. So I did try to employ some statistics. It is me. I'm the swearing analysis guy. So I looked for the density of... not density, how often Ange's name was mentioned in the podcasts that I listened to pre and post Wolves and post Frankfurt. And on average, podcasts mentioned Ange's name once every 4 minutes for Wolves, and like once every 3.5 minutes post Frankfurt. So, they're talking about Ange Postecoglou about the same, but I think the difference, at least from memory, is that the context is different. He was to blame for the Wolves' performance, but the time spent talking about him now, post Frankfurt, is more about acknowledging prior criticisms or sticking on sort of damning with faint praise, like he actually used substitute, stuff like that. And actually there were podcasters who were acknowledging their previous criticisms of Ange. Tottenham Depot, they did this. They acknowledged his criticisms, but stuck to his guns. Or stuck to their guns, sorry. Carolyn talking about Ange's limitations and how Spurs should be more ambitious with their managers. Jack on Rule the Roost. He was saying that he's not been particularly happy with Ange, and he still isn't. But who cares? Which is a bold statement and completely valid in my opinion. Who cares? He even sarcastically said, who would have doubted Ange Postecoglou? Not me. Like, good for him. I think that's the right approach to take. You are a fan. You're a fan first, and your decisions are and your opinions are never going to be 100% right. Live in the moment and enjoy it, because someone will try to take it away from you. I did listen to the WeAreTottenhamTV reaction pods. Very different vibe, as you might expect, compared to post Wolves. It wasn't quite as fun as I was hoping for. I did note that one of the chaps tried to give credit to Ange and acknowledge his previous criticisms of Ange Postecoglou, but the host, I didn't quite catch his name, and sorry, I'm not super familiar with WeAreTottenhamTV yet. But he kind of ignored him and just moved on to try to bathe in kind of a navel-gazing, joy session. It was a bit odd. I did see that before I came on, WeAreTottenhamTV had a follow-up podcast which was titled I'm now Ange in, which kind of really ruffled my feathers, and it's going to annoy me a lot more than I realized. Basically, the chap in the video, I think his name was Sim, was again very, I don't know. I'm gonna walk back on what I said about Jack in my previous comment a little bit, but like, it's one thing to say that you've been on somebody's back and you're still not happy, but who cares about the manager? It's another thing to say, well, after one game I'm Ange in. That kind of flip-flopping reactively is, again, it's your prerogative. But it just must be a very exhausting experience to be constantly changing how you feel about a manager when this is kind of your job. It's just a bit odd to me. Barnaby on SpurredOn, which is one of those daily podcasts, he himself called back to the many months of criticisms that he's been throwing at Ange and asking to be proven wrong, and acknowledged just how much flack, as Barnaby said, that Ange Postecoglou was taken over the past few months from the media and from the fans. So I thought that was kind of nice that Barnaby acknowledged that there must be a pressure on Ange in terms of the heat that he's been subjected to. And I thought that Jim on OhSoSpurs was particularly reflective about his personal issues with Ange, as he put it. I haven't been regularly listening to OhSoSpurs recently, as well as the fan base being in or out on Ange. And also just kind of looking back and recontextualizing the last few months of results and questioning whether it was Ange's decisions or player availability that was affecting results. And this has been something that I know Prof Spur has been advocating for in his newsletter for many, many, many weeks now, as well as others. So how did they feel about Ange being a good or bad manager, these podcasters? Well, again, I think there's an undercurrent that if the team was good yesterday, then the manager made the right call. And I think he made the right decisions last week too, honestly. We got a little unlucky to not get through that game with another goal. And honestly, I think Frankfurt were a little lucky for them scoring last week. Ekitike just showing the quality he has. I think we were good value. Sorry, I'm just kind of throwing my opinions into the podcast this week. I come so prepared to talk about Spurs podcasts that I never really think about how I'm going to talk about Spurs games. So yeah, it's are these podcasters talking about Ange being a good or a bad manager now? Again, they're sort of sticking to their guns. James Moore on View from the Lane, he said that every decision was right yesterday. Seb on the Cheese Room pointed out a similar thing that Prof Spurs has been saying about getting our centre-backs back permits us to play. He also lamented the fact that he's been on several episodes in a row following heavy defeats or impressive wins or impressive draws. But, you know, I think that there is a middle ground, and there is, as Big John Bass said on The Fighting Cock, plenty of room for both. There's no need for him to be entirely a good manager, entirely to be a bad manager. He has his flaws, he has his limitations. He maybe can't work as well with our backup players, but some of our backup players were like 18-year-old midfielders. You know, his flaw might be, depending on how you perceive it, he's not a miracle worker in all circumstances. But when he has his first team, we're pretty good. Others were more frustrated with Ange. I think his name was Gary on An Echo of Glory, was questioning, well, should we give him credit for the pragmatism that we showed yesterday? Or is he a fool for not doing this sooner? And Wicked Spursy said something similar. They just kind of cried, why into the void. I think this is fair to a certain extent. But I think the language is maybe a little dicey to say he's a fool for not doing it sooner. He's just a professional football manager who has a different set of goals than us as fans. I mean, largely speaking, it should be winning football games, but he's trying to build something, and we are looking for wins straight away. There's kind of a myth about Ange Ball, and Jim on OhSoSpurs talked about this, that it's entirely ultra attacking, that it has no flexibility. And I think that we've seen attempts at that. We've seen him play three at the back. It just hasn't worked out because of personnel in the last few months. I'm still on the fence as to whether I care for him to stick around or not. It's going to piss people off maybe, but I'm tired. You lose 17 games, league games, 20 overall for the season, and people are just gonna question it, and it's hard for them to stick by a manager who is the most replaceable component in the system when that happens. But I can also see the logic that's expressed by some, that he hasn't had all of his parts to play with, and let's see how things go through the end of the season. People like Ricky on The Fighting Cock, or my dad, who are just tired. They're just tired of people being fired by Daniel Levy, who are occupying the hot seat at Spurs. I don't think that's entirely a completely good reason to stick with a person as a manager, but again, none of us really have have all the answers. Ange is clearly aware of this, commenting that we're gonna have to put up with him for a little bit longer. And Jack at Rule the Roost spent the most time on this out of all the podcasters, exploring Ange's position at the club and whether we should stick with him at multiple levels, and just the identity that Spurs has right now, and whether or not we can even question getting rid of a manager who is potentially going to take us to a final and a European Cup trophy, or European trophy. It would be stupid to quote his words. Ricky said similar on The Fighting Cock. Something that I didn't see or didn't hear all too often was the relationship between Ange and the players. because it was evident at the final whistle that they still adore him. I mean, Vicario sprinted half the length of the field to just run and embrace him. He didn't go and embrace his teammates. He embraced Ange, and I think that he hasn't lost the dressing room. Jay Harris talked about this on View from the Lane. He actually opened his sort of comment on the pod about this. Jim at OhSoSpurs again. He referred to it. I think this is a really important component, at least to get us through the end of the season, because I do think that changing him in the summer, depending on how we go in the semi-finals, if we go out to Bodo Glimt, I think that there is a good argument to be made that Ange should go in the summer. If there's something tactically that he gets wrong there's just too much evidence for him to say he absolutely deserves to have the job come September, October. And yeah, I mean, maybe I'm guilty of something that has been expressed across the podcast, but like, fans' perceptions can change in one game. Some of us are flip-flopping, and maybe there's context to flip-flopping. But I'm comfortable with where I'm at right now, which is a vague indifference to Ange, but a deep love for Tottenham Hotspur. And so this is an interesting point for me to develop onto my next bullet here, which is about the Ange cultists, as they're described. An echo of glory, Flav on the fighting cock, Jack on the Roost. All referenced how Ange supporters, Ange in folks, cultists, as described on An Echo of Glory and other podcasts in the past, have been complaining about how these people are using this win over Frankfurt to score points online and win internet points and annoy people and troll. And whilst I think that they need to maybe have a bit of a thicker skin about it, folks are looking for them to get rattled, and every time you reference it, they're just going to keep doing it. But these are people. These are just everyday people behind a microphone or behind a phone, getting dug out for having opinions about a football team, and it's just all kind of silly, isn't it? So what I would say is to these people who are Ange supporters, you must be incredibly frustrated over the last few months, having decided through the body of evidence as you have interpreted it that Ange is the right man for the job. And so there must be an element of seeing these people who flip-flopped basically share in the joy that perhaps, I wouldn't say you have some ownership over, but you have been predicting that this would come, that these moments would come. And so I don't think anybody listening to this is going to be the type of person who trolls Jack online about him wanting Ange to go previously. But if that person is listening, at the moment you're winning. You're in the right, There's no need to go and annoy a stranger. Let's just bathe in this moment all together, like a big, weird, gross Roman bath. And the people who've been sticking to their guns about Ange being the right guy, it must have been tiring if you're the slightly more sensible type. Sadly, in the podcasts I've run through so far, most of them have been Ange out for the last few weeks and months. And so I didn't really have much time to talk about the game is about glory, but they have been staunchly, I wouldn't call it Ange in, but Ange supporters, and identifying what he can bring to our football club. And so Steph did talk about how exhausting it's been sticking to a consistent logic over the last few months, seeing us lose, looking at what Ange has been trying to do, the lack of players to enact those plans. And yeah, I kind of feel for him. It must be hard and it must be frustrating and you must want to lash out. And I suppose maybe that's what's happening with a few of these people, possibly on Twitter, telling others that they can't share in this win. And that's not to say that the podcasters I've mentioned previously who have been Ange out have been entirely Ange, haters. Flav on the Fighting Cock has talked for a long time about how he's wanted this to work for so long, and acknowledged in the podcast this week or today that there are intangibles that Ange has changed about our football club potentially. That means that even beyond anything that happens in Europa from this point on, maybe he is the right man for the job. Maybe these people who have been looking at Ange were right. And I think we need to hear the entirety of what somebody is saying. Not necessarily just the emphasize and focus on the bit that really gets under our skin. So there has been a few gaps, like I mentioned, podcasts that have been generally supportive. I didn't get to listen to the Games About Glory early enough in the day to really fit it into my my format as well as I'd like and give it enough time to percolate in my brain. But they also put out a short podcast. And for that reason, I think it's one of the better ones to listen to, because they didn't really crow about being right about Ange or anything like that. Like, you wouldn't expect that of these guys anyway. But it was short, sweet, and a good listen. Come and Discuss Spurs hasn't put out a podcast today. Stu has also been very ardently Angian. And also, I think another big missing point on the flip side would be The Extra Inch, who are one of the most popular Spurs podcasts and have drawn quite a lot of criticism for their assessment of Ange's capabilities as Spurs manager in the past few months. Possibly the heat they've received is because they are the more sort of tactically minded fan, which I think is a sort of a common or logical fan, or at least people like to present themselves as logical. I don't mean that as a criticism, I just mean it's a value that they have in themselves. Tend to, from what I see, tend to be more Ange in than the fans who are willing to let their emotions drive their decision making. So the Extra Inch guys are probably more aligned with an Ange in crowd, but are in a weird Ange out space. So I would like to see how they handled that in the wake of a huge win. So let's wrap this up. I've been recording for 32 minutes. Ben Bowman recorded a post-match, quick recording. He recorded the recording. Nice one, Ian. He recorded some audio for the Fighting Cock in Germany after the game. And I think it sums up how we should be moving forward. And this is something I really want as a fan base for us, is that whether you are Ange in or Ange out, or you just don't care, none of that matters in the wake of last night. Let's have some togetherness right now. I posted something on Blue Sky that, in the bar for Montgomery County Spurs yesterday, we had 15 people, men, women, children, dogs, all sorts of people in all sorts of things going on in their personal lives. But for just a brief, 5-10 seconds after that final whistle went, we just lost our shit in happiness. And I think that that's what this is all about. We've missed so many of those moments over the past few months. And good God, we could have some more in the coming weeks. And it's such a good thing for us. I don't want us to spend our time bickering about whether Ange is the right guy right now. He either is or he isn't. He's not getting fired until the summer. Let's just drop it. Let's stop talking about Andoni Iraola or Xavi or Gareth Southgate or Harry Redknapp or me or whoever to take over the Spurs job. Let's just put it to one side. and let's see if we can enjoy this. Because there's a lot more to life than football, you know. And I just want to highlight, before I sign off, two people within the Spurs community who have shared some very personal news. The first being Harry Sherlock, who him and his wife suffered a deeply, saddening personal loss recently, and they've set up a Just Giving page to support midwives, which I'm going to link to in the show notes for anybody who wants to support Harry and his family at this time for them. And another person who I just want to tell share some love to is my good buddy Mike Steenstra of the Montgomery County Spurs board. He's also a Spurs podcaster, and he records the Rooster and the Villain podcast with his friends who are Brighton and Villa fans. He's also going through some hardships right now, which he shared on his show. But amongst everything, he still managed to find time to help and support the football or soccer community here in Maryland and beyond. And I just want to say thank you to Mike for, amongst everything, just being a good person. Even if he wasn't a Spurs fan, he would be a very good guy. So let's wrap this up. I'm just gonna have one more thank you, and that's to Neb Economou for making our theme song. I keep forgetting to thank Neb. Maybe I can thank him in person very soon. Follow him on Blue Sky if you can, at Ted Cruz in USA. Follow me on Blue Sky at Tottenham Hotspur. And with that, keep making Spurs podcasts.